Yes, I just got the paper published. Let's see if I can summarize it for you. But first, I need coffee. Okay, let's see if I can explain this paper in a simple manner as a summary for you. Okay, so the paper, gosh, what is it called? Should you remember the name of your paper? Probably. So, agricultural production diversity in 4 countries of the Baltic Sea region, prospects for resilient food systems and food security. That's the long title. So let's start with agricultural production diversity. What is agricultural production diversity? Well, it's exactly what it sounds like. It's the kind of diversity of the different produce we're making. I have here on my desk a can of rye, which is one out of many, many different types of produce our food system is everyday producing for us, for our consumption. So having a diversity of different things that we are producing, let's say rye, milk, vegetables, fruits, nuts, whatever, is actually good for the food system. And let me explain exactly how. You see, the food system that we have is currently under a lot of stresses and threats. Like we have climate change, we have now geopolitical conflicts such as a war in Ukraine, and we have problems with water scarcity, droughts, you name it. There's plenty of things impacting and threatening the way we're producing food. So having a diversified system is actually good for the resilience of the system. What is resilience, you might ask? Good question. Well, resilience is basically the system's adaptability, its capacity to withstand shocks and changes that are exposed either internally or externally to the system. So let's say, as an example, it could be that, a major drought hits our food production. And if you have a resilient system, it can cope with that. It can still continue to produce different food for us, and we can still ensure that we actually have something to eat. While if you have a low resilience system, well, then basically things stop working for you. So you want to build resilience. Agricultural production diversity is an important key factor in that resilience. So if we produce a lot of different things, the system becomes stronger and more easy to adapt to changes that are happening. This is why we decided to have a look at this and study it and try to better understand how the production diversity is changing in our countries around the Baltic Sea. So we set out, we did a data analysis with Eurostat data. We looked at data from 4 countries over a 20-year period, from the year 2000 to 2020, just up around the global COVID-19 pandemic. And those 4 countries we looked at is Sweden, Finland, Latvia, and Poland. And we studied those using this statistical data set. So how do you do that? You might ask, and that's a good question. So how do we measure agricultural production diversity? Well, we took statistical data from Eurostat and we looked at 85 different categories of food being produced. Everything from grains and crops and all the way to meat and milk, and we looked at the quantity of them over this time period. Then we used the Shannon Diversity Index, which is an index commonly used in ecology to determine biodiversity, also to some degree to determine exactly what we're looking at, agricultural production diversity. And we used it to derive an index to see how well our countries are performing. And then we got the data for a time series of 20 years showing agricultural production diversity going up and down over this time period for those 4 countries. So what's so interesting about this then? Well, agricultural production diversity, as we determined, is important to provide food system resilience, which in turn is important for food security. But then what makes it even more interesting is that when you start comparing that to the changes that are happening in our food system. And just to give a little bit of context here, what is happening in our food system? Well, we see a farm enlargement. Every year, farms keep on growing bigger in the European Union. We see that in most of the Western world, but also other parts of the world. And this farm enlargement, farm mechanization, follows a certain path. We see that the number of farms are being reduced. We see that the number of farmers are less and less, and there's more machinery in the field. And there is an idea that this would actually impact the production diversity negatively, simply because the farms are keep on growing bigger. So we wanted to test if that was true, and this is exactly what we do in the study. So we took 4 indicators and we looked at how they progress over the same time period. It's utilized agricultural area, basically the size of the farm area that we're farming. It's agricultural labor input, which can be translated to number of farmers, and the number of farms. Finally, we looked at average farm size and how the average farm size of these 4 countries went either up or down. And we compiled this through, basic descriptive statistics, and the results were not very surprising. We see the utilized agricultural area pretty much remaining the same. We also see that the number of farmers are decreasing in every country, especially in countries like Latvia and Poland, but also in Sweden and Finland. And we know that the number of farms have been drastically reduced, especially in Poland. Quite interestingly and shockingly, at the year 2008, we saw a drastic reduction in number of farms. Basically, on 100 hectares of land, we see farms, maybe having up to 15 farms in that land plot of 100 hectares, to now, just a couple of years later, have around 9. That's a big decrease in numbers. And of course, associated with these numbers is also the average farm size, which tends to go up as, the number of farms decreasing, but the agricultural area remains the same. Not very shocking, right? So we see these 4 parameters actually influencing how the farms look like. We also looked at the farm size composition, and this is slightly more difficult to explain. The farm size composition is basically taking the percentage of the total agricultural land and see how much of that land belongs to certain farms of certain size. And we wanted to see how that also impacted. And as we can tell, large farms become more and more dominated in the area. Turn off your phone next time you do a video. Just a recommendation. Adjusting the camera. So, looking at those 5 categories, we then did a Pearson correlation test between those 5 categories of landscape parameters and the agricultural production diversity. And to see if we can see any patterns. Is it so that when farms increases or the number of farmers decreases, that somehow impacts production diversity? And our results showed not really quite anything, right? Well, it showed a lot, but it doesn't show any universal trends between every country. A lot of assumptions in the literature suggest that farm sizes, when they increase, the agricultural production diversity decreases, which is true for the case of Latvia, but it wasn't true for Poland, Finland, or Sweden. And none of these sort of correlations really matched any universal pattern. Also, when we broke down the agricultural production into, different farm size categories, we could not see any real universal trends there either. And this, suggests that maybe things aren't that simple, as farms increases, diversity decreases, or vice versa. Instead, we follow the idea and the setting of this, that agricultural production diversity is multifaceted, and we don't know really what is causing everything. There are many different things. Although the agricultural landscape changes certainly do influence it somehow, we cannot say that they are the sole influencer or that this is exactly how it differs. We continue to speculate a little bit on why the agricultural production diversity might be changing, and we basically have three different theories that might be the case for the countries we studied. The first one is European Union drivers. So the European Union is a dominating force in these four countries. I mean, all the four countries are part of the European Union, at least since 2004. That's when Latvia and Poland joined the EU. And since 2004, all of the farms in the four study countries, they received the single farm payment, which is part of the common agricultural policy. Single farm payment basically is a payment for a subsidy for farmers to produce on their land and ensure that agriculture in the European Union is profitable. So here we have the idea that maybe the crop, this could somehow influence. Since 2015, there's actually a rule that you need to diversify your crop production in order to receive funding from the European Union through the single farm payment. So if you're only producing one crop on your land, you don't get the payments. You actually have to diversify. But again, several studies suggest that that's maybe not quite true. I mean, we know that this might impact it to some degree, but several other scientific studies suggest that this can maybe only partly explain a diversification. And this more has to do with actual farm size and geographical location. The other idea of influencer are the single internal market, SIM. Single internal markets are basically what EU is. Like, everything in the EU can be traded between the different countries without any major obstacles. So you have a custom-free union where you produce potatoes in Sweden and you can send them to Italy to be sold, or whatever you might be producing. So this is interesting because it allows you to actually be producing certain type of food and specialize in that food production. So if your country is very good for, let's say again, grow rye, like Finland, then you can be a rye producer and you sell the rye throughout the entire European Union without any customs hurdle. So it could work as an incentive to be less diversified. At the same time, it could also help you to diversify your business internally. So it's complicated again, but we believe that the single internal market might be working in a certain way or another. Although it's hard for us to actually see that in our data. We don't see that after 2004, when all of the countries joined the EU, or like Latvia and Poland joined the EU, that it actually changed much at that time. So it's still a bit uncertain, but market logic certainly has something to do with agricultural production diversity. Then of course we have the aspect of history. I mean, our countries are diverse, not only in the sense of culture and other aspects, but our history is drastically different. Poland and Latvia used to be communist countries belonging to the sort of Soviet sphere, Latvia even being part of the Soviet Union up until 1991. And then, while Sweden and Finland was more partly oriented to the market capitalist West. Finland and Sweden also been part of the EU much longer than Latvia and Poland has. But what's interesting looking back at the historical explanations to this is that it actually might have impacted how the agricultural production diversity looks like today. So we had to go back quite far back in time when Soviet Union occupied Latvia in the 1940s, and Poland was also under communist rule after 1945. And in these two countries, in Latvia we saw a collectivization of the agriculture. So the Soviet Union went in, they confiscated private land and created these mega farms that were state-owned, known as kolkhoz or sovkhoz, which are these like state-owned mega farms. Poland, on the other hand, was exempted from this for different historical reasons. So the maneuvering of the Communist Party in Poland halted the collectivization of agriculture in Poland. So throughout the communist era of Poland and into the 90s, Poland has been very fractured into many small and medium-sized farms. And this probably impacts the way they are producing food. It impacts their production for agricultural production diversity, because if you have many small farms, there is a certain logic to the fact that they should be producing more diversified production. So, what are our conclusions basically from this paper then? Well, we conclude that we don't see any universal patterns. We don't know exactly if the agricultural landscape with farm enlargement actually impacts the agricultural production diversity at all in the 4 countries we have studied. We would be surprised though if it didn't somehow impact, but we cannot see any clear universal trends that has been suggested in some other papers. But at the same time, we sort of enforce the idea and notions of other previous research that the changes to the agricultural production diversity is multifaceted. It comes from many different perspectives and aspects. So it's not only the landscape changes of farm enlargement that might be impacting the way our agricultural production diversity is changing. It's also, well, simply put it, like other aspects might be influencing, like politics and economics and history. And these are sort of the conclusions we can draw. And with that being said, it seems like there's kind of a few gaps in the research that needs to be addressed. And that is also one of the conclusions we make. The understanding of agricultural production diversity is fairly understudied and needs to be better understood. So, I don't know if I will be doing that research, or maybe you will, or someone else, but it's an interesting case, and I hope that the future will tell us exactly, or not exactly, but somehow how agricultural production diversity is changed for the better, and how we can ensure a more resilient and sustainable food production for the future. Coffee is running out, so thank you for listening. If you're interested in our research, there's a link in the description, below or above, I don't know, but where you can actually find our paper and you can read it for yourself. It's open access, so you should be able to access this no matter who you are or where you are. And big thank you to my co-authors, Sirkku Juhola from University of Helsinki and Madeleine Granvik from Uppsala University, who also happens to be my supervisors, and for the fantastic work they have been helping me putting into this paper. So, great! Have a nice time and see you later!